Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Hanging Out with Mrs. Hammond. We are reading Matilda by Roald Dahl, illustrated by Quentin Blake. And earlier today, we read chapter 16. Well, I'm coming back and we're reading chapter 17 because we read about Miss Honey's cottage. Now, Miss Honey is Matilda's teacher, right? And so we would think that our teachers, do you ever wonder where your teachers live or what they do when they leave school? Well, Matilda had never quite thought about that, but when she went to Miss Honey's cottage, she was a little bit shocked, wasn't she? Miss Honey, she didn't have any furniture and she didn't have electricity. She didn't have any running water, did she? So here's Matilda at her cottage, and she's just like, how can you be so poor, Miss Honey? And she doesn't know if they don't pay her at school or what. But the next chapter, chapter 17, is Miss Honey's story. And you know what? I don't see any vocabulary words that you might be unfamiliar with in this chapter. So I think we're going to begin without doing vocabulary words today. That's because all of you guys are so smart. I just didn't see any that I thought was necessary. Miss Honey's story. Now, I want to know her story, don't you? I mean, why does she live in this cottage with no? She doesn't even have a bed. She sleeps on the floor. And Matilda says that there's like cracks in the floor, like I guess insects could get in there, water maybe. I don't know. It's really sad. So I'm curious, and so here I am back. Okay. So, chapter 17, Miss Honey's story. We mustn't hurry this, Miss Honey said. So, let's just have another cup of tea. And do eat that slice of bread, though. You must be hungry. Matilda took the second slice and started eating it slowly, and the margarine wasn't at all bad. Well, she doubted whether that she could have told the difference if she didn't have known. Miss Honey, she said suddenly, do they pay you very badly at our school? Miss Honey looked up sharply. Oh, well, not too badly, she said. I get about the same as the others. Then it must be still very little if you are so dreadfully poor, Matilda said. Do all the teachers like this live like this? I mean, with no furniture and no kitchen stove and no bathroom. No, they don't, Miss Honey said rather stiffly. I just happen to be an exception. Well, I expect you just happen to like living in a very simple way, Matilda said, probing a little further. It must make house cleaning an awful lot easier, and you don't have any furniture to polish or any of those little silly little ornaments lying around to be dusted everywhere. I mean, and I suppose if you don't have a refrigerator, you don't have to go out and buy all the sorts of junky things like eggs and mayonnaise and ice cream to fill it up with. It must save a terrific lots of shopping that you'd have to do. At this point, Matilda noticed that Miss Honey's face had gone all tight and peculiar looking. And her whole body had become rigid. Her shoulders were hunched up high, and her lips were pressed together tight. And she sat there gripping her mug of tea in both hands and staring deep down into it, thus searching for a way to answer those not quite so innocent questions. There followed a rather long, embarrassing silence, and in the space of 30 seconds, the atmosphere in the tiny room had changed completely, and now it was vibrating with awkwardness and secrets. Matilda said, I am very sorry to ask you those questions, Miss Honey. It is not any of my business. At this point, Miss Honey seemed to be roused herself. She gave a shake of her shoulders, and then she placed her mug on the tray. Why shouldn't you ask me? She said, you must be bound to ask in the end. You are much too bright to have wondered. Perhaps I even wanted you to ask me. Maybe that is why I invited you here after all. I mean, as a matter of fact, You are the first visitor to come to this cottage since I moved in 2 years ago. The first one. Matilda said nothing. She could feel the tension growing and growing into the room. And you are so much wiser than your years. My dear, Miss Honey went on, that is quite staggers me. Although you look like a child, you're not really a child at all because your mind and your powers of reasoning seem to be fully grown up. So, I suppose we might call you a grown-up child, if you see what I mean. Matilda did not say anything. She was just waiting for what was coming next. Well, up to now, Miss Honey said, up to now, I have found it impossible to talk to anyone about my problems. I couldn't face the embarrassment, and anyway, I lacked the courage. Any courage that I had was knocked out of me when I was very young. But now, all of a sudden, I have sort of a desperate wish to tell everything to somebody. And I know you're only a little tiny little girl, but there is some kind of magic on you somewhere, and I've seen it with my own eyes. Matilda became very alert. Oh, the voice was very hearing. She was hearing was surely crying out for help, and it had to be. And the voice again spoke. Have some more tea. It said, I think there's still a drop left. Matilda nodded. Miss Honey poured tea into both mugs and added milk. Again, she cupped her hands, her own mug in both hands, and sat there sipping. Of course, Matilda said. There was a quiet, long silence before she said, May I tell you the story? Matilda said, Well, of course. I am 23 years old, Miss Honey said, and when I was born, my father was a doctor in the village, and we had a nice old house, quite large, red brick. It's tucked away in the woods behind the hills, and I don't think that you'd know it. Matilda kept silent. I was born there, Miss Honey said, and then came the first tragedy. My mother died when I was 2. My father was a busy doctor, and he had to have someone to run the house and to look after me, so he invited my mother's unmarried sister, my aunt, to come and live with us, and she agreed, and she came. Matilda was listening. She was listening intently. How old was the aunt when she moved in? She asked. Oh, not very old, Miss Honey said. Well, I should say about 30. I mean, I don't know, but I hated her right from the start. I miss my mother terribly. And the aunt was not a very kind person. And my father didn't know that because he was hardly ever around, but when he did put in an appearance, the aunt behaved differently. Miss Honey paused and she sipped her tea. I can't think why I'm telling you all this, she said, embarrassed. Go on, Matilda said. Please. Well, Miss Honey said, well, then came the second tragedy. When I was 5, my father died very suddenly, and one day he was there, and the next day he was gone, and so I was just left to live alone with my aunt, and she became my legal guardian. She had all the powers of a parent over me, and in some way or another, she became the actual owner of the house. Well, how did your father die? Matilda asked. Well, it's very interesting that you asked that, Miss Honey said, because I myself was much too young to question it at the time, but I found out later that there was a good deal of mystery surrounding his death. Didn't they know how he died? Matilda asked. Well, not exactly. Well, Miss Honey said, hesitating. But you see, no one could believe that he would ever have done it. He was such a very sane and sensible man. What? Matilda asked. Killed himself. Matilda was stunned. Did he? She gasped. Well, that's what it looked like, Miss Honey said, but who knows? I mean, she shrugged and turned away and stared out of the tiny window. I know what you're thinking. Matilda said, "You're thinking about the ant that killed him, and you made it look as though that he'd done it himself. You think that's what happened?" "I'm not thinking anything," Miss Honey said. "Well, one must never think things like that without proof." The little room became very quiet, and Matilda noticed that the hands clasping the mud were trembling slightly. "And then what happened after that?" she asked. "What happened to you when you were all left alone with that aunt? Wasn't she nice to you?" "Nice?" Miss Honey said. "She was a demon. Oh, as soon as my father was out of that way, she became a holy terror. Oh, my life was a nightmare." "What did she do to you?" Matilda asked. "Well, I don't want to talk about it." Miss Honey said, "It's too horrible, but in the end I became so frightened of her that I used to start shaking when she would come into the room. You must understand. I mean, I was never a strong character like you. I was always shy and retiring." "Didn't you say anything or have any other relatives?" Matilda asked. "Any aunts or uncles or grannies who would just come and see you?" "None that I knew about," Miss Honey said, "but they were all either dead or they'd gone to Australia, and that's still the way that it is now, I'm afraid." "So you grew up in the house alone with your aunt?" Matilda said. "But you must have gone to school." "Of course." Miss Honey said, I went to the same school that you're going to now, but I lived at home." Miss Honey paused and stared down into her empty tea mug. "I think I'm going to try to explain to you," she said, is that over the years I've become so completely cowed and dominated by this monster of an aunt that when she gave me an order, no matter what it was, I obeyed it instantly. That can happen to you, you know. And by the time that I was 10, I had become her slave. I mean, I did all the housework. I made her beds. I washed her, ironed all for her. I did all the cooking. I learned to do everything. But surely you could have complained to somebody," Matilda said. "To whom?" Miss Honey said. "And anyway, I was far too terrified to complain. I told you I was her slave." "Did she beat you?" "Well, let's not go into details," Miss Honey said. "How simply awful," Matilda said. "Did you cry nearly all the time?" "No. Only when I was alone. I cried." Miss Honey said, "I wasn't allowed to cry in front of her, but I lived in fear." "What happened when you left school?" Matilda asked. "Well, I was a bright pupil," and Miss Honey said, "and I could easily have gotten to the university, but there was no question of that. I mean, well, why not, Mrs. Honey, or Miss Honey?" "Because I was needed at home to do the work." "Well, then how did you become a teacher?" Matilda asked. "Well, there's a teacher training college in Reading," Miss Honey said, "and that's only 40 minutes bus ride away from here. And so I was allowed to go there on one condition, that I came straight home again every afternoon to do the washing and the ironing and to clean the house and to cook the supper." "How old were you then?" Matilda asked. "Well, when I went into the teaching training, I was 18, Miss Honey said. "So you could have just picked up and walked away," Matilda said. "Oh, no, not until I got a job," Miss Honey said. "And don't you forget, I was by then dominated by my aunt. I mean, to such an extent that I wouldn't have dared. You can imagine what it was like to be completely controlled like that by a very strong personality. I mean, it turns you to jelly. So that's it. There's the sad story of my life. Now I've talked enough." "Oh, please don't stop," Matilda said. "You haven't even finished yet. How did you manage to get away from her in the end and come and live in this funny little house?" "Oh, that was something," Miss Honey said. "I was proud of that." "Well, tell me," Matilda said. "Well," Miss Honey said, "when I got my teacher's job, the aunt told me that I owed her a lot of money. And I asked her why, and she said, because I had been feeding you all these years and buying you shoes and your clothes, and she told me that it added up to thousands and thousands of dollars, and I had to pay her back by giving her my salary, and for the next 10 years. But that's all you're going to get," She's even arranged with the school authorities to have my salary paid directly to her own bank. She made me sign this paper. Well, you shouldn't have done that, Matilda said. Your salary was your chance of freedom. I know, Miss Honey said, but by then I had been her slave nearly all my life, and I hadn't the courage or the guts to say no. I was still petrified of her, and she could still hurt me badly. So how did you manage to escape? Matilda asked. Oh, Miss Honey said, smiling for the first time. That was 2 years ago. It was my greatest triumph. Please tell me, Matilda said. Well, I used to get up very early and go for walks when my aunt was still asleep. Miss Honey said, and one day I came across this tiny little cottage. It was empty, and I found out who owned it. And it was a farmer, and I went to see him. Farmers always get up very early, and he was milking his cows, and I asked him if I could rent the cottage. And you can't live there, he cried. It's got no conveniences, no running water, no nothing. I want to live there. I said, I'm a romantic. I've fallen in love with it, and please rent it to me. You're mad, he said, but if you insist, you're welcome to it. The rent will be 10 pence a week. Oh, here's 1 month's rent in advance, I said, giving him 4 pence. Thank you so very much. How super, Matilda cried, and so suddenly she had a house all of her own. But how did you pluck up the courage to tell the aunt? Well, that was a tough one, Miss Honey said, but I stilled myself to it. One night after I cooked her supper, I went upstairs and I packed a few things that I possessed in a cardboard box, and I came downstairs and I announced I was leaving. I've rented a house, I said. My aunt exploded. Rented a house? She shouted. How can you rent a house when you have only £1 a week in this world? I've done it, I said. And how are you going to buy food for yourself? I will manage, I mumbled and rushed out of the front door. Here's Miss Tilda. Here's Miss Honey and Matilda sitting there talking about this. Poor Miss Honey. Bless her heart. Oh, well done, Matilda cried. So you were free at last. Yay. I was free at last. But Miss Honey said, I can't tell you how wonderful it was, but have you really managed to live here on £1 a week for 2 years, Matilda asked. I most certainly have, Miss Honey said. I pay 10 pence for my rent, and the rest just about buys me paraffin for my stove and for my lamp and a little milk and tea and bread and margarine. Oh, that's all I really need. As I told you, I have a jolly good tuck-in at the school lunch. Tilda stared at her. What a marvelously brave thing Miss Honey had done. Suddenly she was a heroine in Matilda's eyes. Isn't it awfully cold in the winter, though? She asked. Well, I've got my little paraffin stove, Miss Honey said, and you'd be surprised how snug I can make it in here. Do you have a bed, Miss Honey? Well, not exactly, Miss Honey said, smiling again, but they say that it's very healthy to sleep on a hard surface. All at once, Matilda was able to see the whole situation with absolute clarity. Miss Honey needed help. There was no way that she could go on existing like this indefinitely. You would be a lot better off, Miss Honey, she said, if you'd give up your job and drew your unemployment money. Well, I would never do that, Miss Honey said, because I love teaching. This is awful, Aunt, Matilda said. I suppose she is still living in the lovely old house. Very much so, Miss Honey said. She's still only about 50. She'll be around for a long time. And do you think that your father really meant her to own that house forever? I'm quite sure he didn't, Miss Honey said. Parents will often give a guardian the right to occupy the house for a certain length of time, but it is nearly always left in trust for the children. It then becomes the child's property when he or she grows up. Well, then surely it is your house, Matilda said. Well, my father's will was never found, Miss Honey said. It looks as though somebody might have destroyed it. No prize guessing. For guessing who, Matilda said. No prizes, Miss Honey said. But If there is no will, Miss Honey, then surely the house goes automatically to you. You are the next of kin. I know I am, Miss Honey said, but my aunt, she produced a piece of paper supposedly written by my father saying that he left the house to his sister-in-law in return of her kindness for looking after me. I'm certain it's a forgery, but no one can prove it. Can you try? Matilda said. Couldn't you just hire a good lawyer and make a fight of it? I don't have the money to do that, Miss Honey said, and you must remember that this aunt of mine is a much respected figure in this community. She has a lot of influence. Who is she? Matilda asked. Miss Honey hesitated a moment. Then she said softly, Miss Trunchbull. Miss Trunchbull is my aunt. So, wow, we've just learned that Miss Trunchbull is Miss Honey's aunt. She lived with that horrible woman. She grew up with her. She was like her slave. How awful. Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine. This is just heartbreaking. So, the next chapter is called The Names. Matilda, what can you infer that Matilda's going to do? I mean, her little mind must be just going every which way, right? Well, I bet she'll figure out something, don't you? So, check back later, and we're going to read chapters 18 and maybe 19, and then I believe we'll have 2 more chapters after that. So, we are almost done, and I have to come back and read this tonight. Thank you so very much. Thank you for everything, and thank you for listening, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.